Hey everybody, this is Thomas Trimmingham. I'm the Director of Marketing at M&R Companies. And today I'm talking with James Vanderwoord of Witly. James, if you want to just kind of chime in and talk about your company and where you're at and what you guys do.
Yeah, sure. As you mentioned, our company is called Witly, and we're based out of Hamilton, Ontario. We're an apparel design and manufacturing company, and that's the gist of it. Yeah.
And something unique that I feel like it's valuable to mention, we were talking briefly before we started this interview. Your company is unique in a sense because how you got started, and maybe you can talk about how you got
Right.
started and how that might be different than other custom decorators.
Sure. Yeah. Well, we started our company originally as a brand. So we have a brand called Halfwits, which we has a long history of its own. But my partner Mark and I, we originally started that brand when we were in university as a bit of a project, just as something to work on that we felt passionate about as a side project. And we carried that for a little while, just printing graphic tees and doing all that locally. And eventually found our way into cut and sew, and got into wholesale accounts and distributed the brand in hundreds of stores across Canada and the US and worldwide. And somewhere along the line, we sort of found our way pivoting into manufacturing and sort of took a hold on that side of the space. And that's been our primary focus really over the last couple of years.
Yeah, it's an interesting difference in your company and from other companies because the interesting thing and we were talking about this briefly as well is a lot of companies get started by decorating, right? They get started by
Right.
decorating finished garments, and maybe we could just dig in a little bit. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what did it look like for you to get your brand off the ground? And obviously, you've had some success with that,
Sure.
significant. Where other people they struggle a lot more, and I hear from people all the time, like, "Oh man, I can't wait to start a shirt brand," but they
Right.
sometimes they don't even know how to get started. So maybe just speak to that.
Right. Yeah, well, it's actually like it's something that we're sort of excited to share with the people that come to us because, I mean, as I'm sure you guys are aware, in every other print company in the world, somebody's hitting them up on a daily basis saying, I want to start a brand. What we sort of have the advantage of here at Whitley is just that we've gone through the mill. We learned what works, what doesn't. We were, you know, it's not that our brand was crazy successful, but we had this certain level of success that allowed us to carry ourselves into a viable business for quite a long time, and has led us here. We now have, I think, 10 or 11 people full time, which is a pretty big change from what we had when we first started this thing. Just selling T-shirts literally out of a car at a party or whatever to our friends or whoever wanted to buy them at the time. So yeah, I mean, it's just the reality is starting a brand is very difficult, and there's a lot of things you should be aware of, and um, there's a lot of things you shouldn't waste your time and money on, and there's other things that you should put your focus on. And we learned all that the hard way, so we like to be able to pass that on and share our knowledge and our experience with the people that we work with, big or small, because there's people that come to us looking for 12 T's, like a lot of people that are just starting their first brand, and there's other people that have huge successful breweries or companies that have done really well in the space that they exist in already, but apparel's been something in the back of their minds that they hadn't had a chance to really engage yet. So we like to share the thinking there.
That's super helpful for people, honestly. Like, because
Yeah,
maybe just to dig in just a little one step further, and we can talk more about your company. Um,
sure.
what are a couple things that people should really avoid if they're starting a brand?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, like one of the biggest things that we learned obviously is just simply just management of inventory. I think expectations uh, are sometimes all over the map. On the other hand, there's people that come to us and they want to make one or two teas, and that doesn't necessarily work with our business model on our side. But I think it's just like for us, it's about managing expectations, managing SKU counts, and like you don't need to put out 400 different items to start a brand. The good thing is right now is that like e-com is more accessible than it's ever been, and that seems to be the world where people really should start. getting into stores is a great accomplishment, but I mean, the sales tool's right there in front of you. One of the like primary things that we like to understand about the people we are working with is whether or not they do have plans to eventually get into stores, though, because at the end of the day, while this is a project or a fun, exciting thing that people are starting and feel passionate about, that if they want to hold on to it for a long time, it's got to become a business. And wholesale margins are very difficult to manage if you're if that's ultimately your goal. So, some people start on e-commerce and they're selling their tees for $20, and then they realize that if they want to get into a store, they have to sell their tee to that store for $8 or $9, whatever it is. And that's where a lot of people find they get held up in a crossroads. And so that's another angle that I think we can speak to quite clearly, because we did the same thing. The first production order we ran, because it was fully custom and we had higher minimums. I think we overproduced by like 2,000 units, because we thought, well, this many people bought it here, and if we just continue on the same sales trajectory, then that'll be no problem. We'll be able to manage that. But by the time that we had gotten everything and turned it around, we had a new season of clothing we were designing, and that's probably one of the most wasteful experiences of our business. But we learned it the hard way, and haven't done it again.
But that's a great example, and that's something that people can learn from, in a sense. Like, how do you, and again, every business and model is different, but how do you manage estimation versus reality? I mean, one thing that popped into my head that maybe you could speak to just briefly, and then I want to pivot back to, kind of like your core goals as a company, but
Sure.
It's just, how do you test designs or graphics? I mean, I think that might be one of the most kind of underrated steps in brand development.
Sure.
Is just, I've caught myself on multiple occasions thinking, hey, I got the greatest thing I've ever, developed here or drawn here.
Right.
But I've done it in a bulk, I've done it in a vacuum versus going out, having people shoot it full of holes. So maybe just talk to that.
Yeah, well, when we were focusing more on the wholesale side, we got that opportunity we'd produce samples and we'd have to show it at trade shows, and we would be relying on pre-sales to be able to finance or to decide what we're actually going to produce. If you're selling direct online, maybe you don't have that same luxury, but you do have the luxury of ultimately controlling your the amount you're producing right out the gate, and getting a sense. I think for a lot of people, it's better to sell out on a small run and see if it works, and pivot from there, than to overinvest in. I mean, even though it's small amounts, if you're a new brand, even 50 units is tough to sell. Like, it doesn't necessarily happen overnight, and the reality is nobody really needs another t-shirt brand. So you gotta find your audience, and you gotta make sure that they have a reason why that they're going to want to buy your apparel. And usually it's a lifestyle thing or something, whether it's another product or a lifestyle thing, something has to marry to the brand. It can't just be just another graphic design with no purpose. Doesn't really do it for people. At least it doesn't have a long lifespan. So, not to say you can't put art on a shirt, but you've got to find your audience.
Absolutely. And how many different versions of "I'm with stupid" can you print with an arrow, right? I mean, it's like, there's only one direction, or the other direction. There's only three options.
Yeah, and sometimes you might get lucky. I don't know. It depends on how good you are at selling, and how good you are at finding your space online. But people got to see it, and then people need to actually engage. And it's one thing for it to get in front of people, but it's another thing for people to spend their hard-earned money on, and actually click through on checkout. Yep. I think that was yeah.
Now, voting with their wallet, that's one absolute way of testing it. I've talked to people about that before, like literally putting stuff out in almost very limited scale, but you're just seeing what people are actually going to buy. That's a
Yeah.
critical thing too. I'm
Yeah.
going to pivot just real quick, and I just
Sure.
want to cover what's the past couple of months been like for you. Everybody's had a different experience, like
Yeah.
what's it been like up in Canada and by Toronto, and what have you experienced in the past couple of months?
Yeah, I think like everyone, when we first started seeing shutdowns and things like that, everybody had like a jerk reaction, and just we went from having like a whole bunch of POs in the works from some of our biggest customers to just everyone putting everything on hold at once. So there was definitely a couple of weeks of minor panic where you're just looking to see what's this thing going to turn into. And as the reality of COVID-19 got greater, it became a really important moment for us to reflect on, like, on just our business as a whole and sort of where we're at and how, can we survive this if it happens again, or how long is this going to last? In Canada, we're lucky enough that there's a lot of government support that sort of came to fruition. I'm not entirely sure how it looks on the U.S. side or in other territories, but there were things like wage subsidies and things that were put in place as a result. And that once those things became a reality, it allowed us to move forward a lot more comfortably, just knowing that there was some sort of back end support from the government. But on the other hand, we also found that people just started slowly but surely, realizing that someday things are gonna go back, maybe not totally to normal, but at least halfway there, and they need to be ready for that. So that was, I think we found a lull, but we found it picked up reasonably quickly afterward. So it took some people longer than others. And then initially, when it first all hit, my partner Mark, he actually just took the time of, we had a lot of downtime. We had a bunch of people were working from home. We did some temporary layoffs, thankfully, which were able to be temporary for the time. And Mark started a project called Careware, which he just basically teamed up with a bunch of artists over Instagram and met up with a whole bunch of people, released some quick designs, and we produced them basically on demand, which is something that we don't normally do, but we had the space and time. So he put the site together that allowed people to choose what charity they wanted to donate. So a portion of the sale went to the artist who designed it. A portion of the sale went to a charity or a healthcare, something to support healthcare workers. And then of course, there's just the manufacturing costs, which helped us, as a small business, to be able to keep busy during some uncertain times.
That's a great deal, man. I think a lot of companies have done what they can, whether it's for local people and supporting artists is a big deal, because I think, artists, unfortunately, a lot of times are kind of left off to the side because they might be contractors or they're commission based, and then if they lose all their commissions, I've really, being an artist myself for many years, I feel the pain of that group, because they're not really good at self-advocating, will you say? They're just kind of left out of things, and anybody that's willing to help artists is top in my book, because that group is, well, there's only a certain amount of percentage of the population that basically live to create, without getting too woo-woo, they live to create beauty in the world, right? And I mean, whatever we can do to support that and encourage it, in my opinion, is has to keep on. So, in one sense, I want to just talk briefly about how your transition into decorating, like in stages. And how small did you start, and when did you kind of ramp up as far as decorating and learn that process and all that? What was that like?
Yeah, so we had a fairly good understanding as to the process, and what everything was about, just from our experience of we had spent some pretty hands-on time in the factories that we worked with out in Brunei and in Peru and some other places, and we had our own exposure to what screen printing and the sort of the decorating side of things had looked like as well. So because we had our brand, we had we had that to keep us busy, and we just used a little bit of time and invested a sort of a, in the grand scheme of things, a relatively small amount of money on buying some used equipment. We bought a 6-color press that ultimately, once we actually learned how to use it, we realized we needed to replace it pretty quickly. And we just bought that and a small dryer, and we put it all in my garage for a certain amount of time, and just had a goal of like, let's learn this as hands-on as we possibly can, and we'll see if this goes anywhere. And if it doesn't, we've got some cool tools to experiment with ourselves on our own projects, and it's not like a huge amount of money sunken in. But luckily for us, it took us a little while. I mean, we learned, like, we took advice from people that had it to offer, but originally we learned that, like, we learned a rugged way from like YouTube videos, and did all that, and did all the trial and error, and failed a lot, but we made sure we were at a certain point of confidence before we were ever going to take money from anyone to supply the service. And over the years, we've just, we've brought more people on who had experience from outside. But I mean, I think we did a pretty good job of getting up to speed fairly quickly. And luckily now we've got a very strong team of professionals that really know what they're doing. But definitely at the early days, it was garage living and figuring it out day by day.
It's funny because I had an email from a guy just today that basically asked me a question, and we get emails into the company all the time, and he asked me a question. He's like, how do you use, this specific press and not make a huge mess?
Right.
I was like, actually, that's a really good question. I thought to myself, because I was like, well, I mean, you gotta, and then I was thinking to myself, I was like, I think the first probably 25 times I ever printed anything, I got ink everywhere,
Yeah.
and so having that thought and that process. And one of the things I noticed when I was looking at your, Instagram or your stuff is you do have a very kind of, although it's very crafted feeling, and I mean, this stuff, like,
Mm-hmm.
you can tell you're really thinking about what design goes on what garment and what color, you know what I mean? You can kind of see
Right.
that, you're thinking about the garment as a whole, as a
For
presentation,
sure.
rather than necessarily just the graphic. Because I
Definitely.
think that's always that's a thing I noticed. Um,
Mm-hmm.
your stuff here is very clean as well, I would say, as far as, like, it's not, just slapped on there. So, is that
Yeah.
something that you guys were you always kind of geared that kind of clean crafted thing, or is that something you came to after time?
I think so. I mean, truthfully, because our initial goal, was when we started our business was to be working on our own brand. When we sort of came to the point of deciding that we were going to be working with other people and on other people's brands, one thing, because it wasn't our initial idea, sort of as what we had set out for our business, and it sort of came to us later. It was very important for us to be working with people that we did align with, and that we felt, we wanted to be able to come to the table with as much excitement about someone else's project or brand as we did with our own. And like every shop, you get some stuff that you feel less passionate about than others, but we're sort of lucky in the sense that we've got a pretty wide customer base of people that are very like-minded, and that's really important to us. Um, just to sort of share that. And then, I mean, on the other hand, we also do a lot of the design work for the people we work with as well. So, I mean, people might come to us with graphics, but we do a lot of suggesting and give quite a bit of advice as to what we think might work best. So I'm sure some of what you're seeing there is maybe comes to light in that process.
Absolutely. So, what would you say? I mean, just a couple more questions. I want to respect your time, and I really appreciate it.
Sure.
What would you say has been a significant hurdle or roadblock, maybe something that's really, maybe, that you've had to overcome, that you've worked on? I mean, everybody has a little bit of a different, and maybe COVID's the big one, but, or maybe something else, but, and you talked about estimating inventory correctly, but,
Sure.
with other printers, often I hear about it being scaling or growing or adding too
Yeah.
many employees, or, something along those lines. So what has it been like for you, and what's something that you could speak to?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely it. I think my part, again, we started this, we've been involved in many business like things, but this is the first real business that we had started and, really took on ourselves. We had never had employees. We had never, spent the amount of money on rent and equipment and all this other stuff. It's our first go at it, as I assume it is for most people. So, like you said, I think scaling is probably one of the biggest challenges for anyone. And it's nerve wracking. The equipment that we buy from you guys, it's great equipment. And, once you have it, we've bought things that, once it's in hand, we're like, oh, why didn't we do this sooner? But it's still a massive investment, and you have to be able to take that on with a great deal of confidence, because at the end of the day, if it doesn't work out, or if you're not set up to, be able to afford and use the tools that you are buying, that's, you're going to run into some trouble there. So I think, there's a certain amount of anxiety around making these big purchase decisions, which I think, we've been able to do luckily quite confidently, because we had our customer base grew pretty quickly, and we didn't really have too much to worry about in that regard. But that's definitely a big one. And like you said as well, like, I mean, taking on employees and all these other things, there's like, at the end of the day, every 2 weeks we gotta send everyone their paycheck, or do all that. And you just hate to get into a situation where you can't do that. And it would just be, so we just, like I said, we just had to be super confident that we were ready for it. And we've definitely taken big risks. We've taken huge risks that, could have put us into awkward positions, but that was maybe, there's a fine balance. Luckily, my partner's a little bit more reserved. I'm a bit more of the risk taker, I think, on our side, and we find a good way to balance each other in scaling our business.
I think that's worth talking about just briefly too, is partnerships. It's funny, I've talked to husband and wife partnerships. I've talked to people that were, what would you say, kind of complementary partners. Maybe they have skills that the other one doesn't
Right.
have, and they kind of shore up the other one. And then I've talked to some partners where for some reason they just get along, but they have almost the same skill set, and they just magnify each
Right.
other.
Right.
How does that work for you in your situation?
Yeah, well, Mark, my business partner, his design, his background is in design, and that's where uh, that's where a lot of our, I think a lot of what our business has become and what our business has been centered around has been a direct result of Mark's skill set, and just knowledge within design on his own. My background is actually in film. I still work in film and sort of juggle running this business at the same time. But we've been able to manage a really good support system between the two of us to just make sure we're covered in all our bases. And we're learning all the time. We still are, but luckily, we're all ears to each other. And I think that's got to be. I just can't imagine being in business with someone who doesn't have who doesn't give you that. It's honestly, it's like a marriage, and it costs a lot of money if you're going to get a divorce, and you've wasted a lot of time. So you better be confident that you like the person, and not just like them, that you can actually work together. There's a lot of times, I mean, there's a lot of people that get into get into a business with their friends, and it'll crush friendships and relationships or whatever. It's tough.
Oh yeah. Yeah, yeah.
So
Yep. And it's funny because some of my experiences were some of the best roommates I ever had, or business partners as I had growing up, were people I
right,
wouldn't necessarily hang out with and have a beer with,
right,
but they
right.
were, you know what I mean? Like, but they would hold their own. And on the other
Yeah,
side, I've had friends where it's like, hey, maybe we could try something out, and it's worked out. But then there's the friends where, they're friends, but they don't mind seeing what they can get, So it's like you got to be extra
sure.
careful
Yeah,
with those
yeah,
situations. I want to be
yeah.
respectful of your time, and I think maybe just a couple of tips or ideas for printers that might be thinking about creating a brand. Maybe just like two
Hmm.
or three tips so you think out of the gate. Somebody's either somebody's got an idea, maybe they've had an idea for a long time, they want to create a brand. What are your thoughts? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, like I said for before, if you're creating a brand, I think the most important thing is just to have a why and a purpose. And, the why can be that I'm a really good artist and people really like my art and this is cool. And there's a lot of times that sticks to the wall, but at the end of the day, nobody really needs another t-shirt brand. So you're going to have to, if you're going to try and sell this to a wide audience, you're going to want to be able to at least, uphold some sort of value to them, whether it's lifestyle or just simply in the design. But for screen printers specifically, I think for us, one thing that we try and drive on too is just take the time to be experimental, learn new things, and go outside of your comfort zone a little bit. We've only more recently, but we've been trying to implement like a half day for development every week, just to whether or not, like, nobody likes to make samples, nobody likes to do small amounts in production, not in this business at least. So we're just trying to dedicate hours to it every week because whether it's something that we need to do for a customer that someone's asking us that's a little outside of our sort of daily routine and box, and just figuring out if we can do it, and if we can do it efficiently and how we're going to price that, just to make sure that all that lines up. Or if that's not there, it's learning and trying new things for our own, and seeing how we can manipulate and use the tools that we do have in new ways that allow us a bit of creative freedom for the future.
I agree 100%. Like innovating it's weird how much innovation is accidental in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah,
playing with
yeah,
something, and and I saw that in R&D when I was working with Harley. It's like we would be doing an attempt at creating an effect, whether it was glitter or heat pressing something, and the
right,
person I was talking to was distracted. They didn't understand what I was saying, and they do
right,
something completely wrong. And I'd be like, "Well, wait a minute, look at that. That came out amazing. Like,
yeah,
what did you do?" And then we'd have to
yeah,
reverse near what they did by accident, And
mm-hmm.
it's definitely, you want to keep open to that, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I would
Yeah,
say, like, in maybe in closing, so to speak, like, what are different ways that people can get in touch with you if maybe they want to get your help as far as branding? I'm sure you guys have a process, how you work with people, or how you
yep,
prefer people to connect with you, because I think some of your experience that you spoke to, whether it's going overseas for manufacturing, or it's just, some of your connections or some of your stuff, could probably really help people, even if it's just an advice at this standpoint. Because and just say this briefly, like I had some brief experience, working with some different companies, helping them. We would produce, and this is years ago, so it's probably done differently now, but we would produce 65 designs for, say, a Sears or Kohl's season. We'd go in to see a buyer who, at the time, no offense to them, but they probably could have been my daughter or teenage kid, and
sure,
they would flip through 65 designs. They'd go, and they'd be like, okay, maybe this one, maybe this
yeah,
one. And they'd
oh
pick
yeah,
out
they
maybe
move at
10,
rapid pace.
yeah, 10 out of like 65,
Yeah,
and you'd just be like, oh, and then they would want to see perfect prints of those before they would pull the trigger. But
right,
that's a different thing for retail than it is for creating your own brand. So that's where
yeah,
maybe you could help people in regards to that. So how do you prefer people to interact with you and your company?
yeah, sure. I mean, house at bywitly.com, BYWITLY is our general email that goes to hits everybody's inbox. So if people want to reach out there, we're always glad to give our take on whatever people are working on, and share advice. And the other thing is just Instagram. We're always on Instagram, so if you reach out through there, again, it's by Witly on Instagram, and someone will hit you up, and yeah, I mean, we're happy to give our take. We don't know everything, but happy to share what we do. And we're still learning, and we've been lucky enough that there've been some other companies, even as of like in the last few months, that have given my partners some the time of day, and I think that we'd like to pass that on, because it's business is competitive, but a lot of people have given us the time of day that got us to where we are, and so hopefully we can share a bit of that too.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, James. And I'm
No
sure
worries.
this is going to help people. And I'm excited to get more exposure for your company out there to the M&R, the Blue Crew group out here that we, everybody kind of works together. So
Yeah,
yeah, it was great. I appreciate it. Now, hopefully I
sounds
can
good.
sometime get up there and see you guys in person. So I
Yeah,
appreciate it.
hopefully. Yeah,
All right.
that's great. Thanks so much, Thomas.
Yep. Yep. Thank you.